Hey guys, Ogerpon here, and welcome to SPL Draft Notes Week 2, the series where we go over everything and anything SPL, whether it be game scores from last week, pick'ems for matchups this week, or as well as some cool highlight mods and going over some really cool sets that happened the week prior. If you guys do enjoy this series and this video today, be sure to drop a like on the video as well as subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 3,000 subs by the end of the year, and honestly, if everybody who watches this today drops a sub, I think we'll get there today, so I'd really appreciate your support along that journey. And yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into last week's recap. First up, let's give a quick recap for week number 1. In our first game, we had Vivid versus 6-Foot Hacks in a game where Leo just couldn't handle the frog power from Greninja, Battlebond popping, and claiming a ton of Leo's team before he could really make a comeback, grabbing Vivid a nice 3-0 victory. Next up, we had MV versus Kyle A, and man, oh man, we'll talk about it later on, but that opening sequence from Kyle was incredibly impressive. That and Loaded Dice Bear Tick went crazy in the game, but MV was able to just narrowly pull out a 1-0 victory due to some nice positioning. In our third game, we had Seabad versus It's Danny Mac, and holy Ogerpon, this matchup was rough for Danny. He really didn't have much for the Ogerpon, but especially when his immediate answer got crit and 2-hit KO'd off rip, it was always going to be an uphill battle. Ogerpon claiming all 6 KOs in this game, but we'll talk about it a little bit more later on. Next up, we had Shuckle King versus Mephisto. A pretty tight game, very much so down to the wire. Pretty unfortunate misses on Mephisto's side, but Shuckle ended up bringing a really solid team, including Pokemon like Terra Poison Umbreon, forming a nice solid defensive backbone with Pokemon like Talonflame, grabbing himself a nice 2-0 victory. Then we had Nexus versus Thomas. Thomas pulling out a 3-0 victory in a game where he played and positioned very well. Nexus just couldn't seem to break through the team. Zarude in particular putting in crazy amounts of work, grabbing himself a 3-0 victory. Another game with some unfortunate misses in it was Uzi versus Drewby. Kilowattrel just could not seem to hit an air slash, but despite that, Drewby also positioned very well, able to grab himself a nice 3-0 victory on the back of Pokemon like Electrode with the Terra Grass and Hisuian Arcanine. And then lastly, in a very close game, we had Joey Pokemon versus Visually, and Viz brought the heat this game. Again, we'll talk about it a little bit here in a second, but that Tinglu really putting on a ton of pressure, putting Joey in the back foot, and the little guy Crocolore terra-fairing and doing really well in the matchup as well. Viz took home a nice commanding 3-0 victory, putting himself, starting really strong in this first game of the season. Now, before we jump on and start talking about matchups for the upcoming week, I want to give some shoutouts and some highlights to some really awesome moments that we had in week 1. First up, we have to talk about Kyle versus MV. MV, like I said, ended up pulling out a nice narrow 1-0 victory, but I gotta shout out Kyle's play and prep early in the game. Kyle started off by leading off with an Overgrow Rillaboom. The point of this was to disguise it, or disguise the disguise, and make MV think that it was a Zoroark, and Kyle accidentally sent it out, but it was, in fact, the Rillaboom, eating up a Thunderbolt from the Thundurus, getting behind a sub, getting into Overgrow range with a Life Orb, and then after a drum beating, putting that Thundurus very low at about half health. From here, Kyle was prepared. He knew that a likely pivot would probably be a Galarian Weezing, and he was teching the Life Orb mixed Boom Burst, doing another 50% 2-hit KO to that Weezing on the switch in, and he almost pulled off the craziest 3 turns of a draft leg that I've seen in a long time by clicking a hard focus punch, expecting Hisuian Goodra to come in, and let me tell you, in watching MV's commentary, he was very close to going into it. I mean, his finger was hovering the button, but he ended up staying in, so the focus punch didn't pop. Really cool set from Kyle, though, very innovative. It also showed great foresight and him envisioning these sequences and how the early game would play out, and it put him in a pretty commanding position early, so big shoutouts to Kyle. I was very impressed with how he played this early game. Next up, of course, we have to shout out the Ogerpon Hearthflame, picking up 6 kills versus Danny. Now, granted, his check in the Drifblim, which wasn't the best one in the world, but it was a check, did get crit on the initial switch in, and that made it very hard for him to deal with this thing throughout the course of the game. Now, beyond this, though, I think Seabad prepped a team that was beautifully positioned around Ogerpon winning. He recognized, man, this Pokemon does incredibly well. He used Bundle as a great means of getting it in, using it to flip turn in and out on things like Jirachi and Sylveon, which were going to be typical switch-ins to an Iron Bundle, and then getting in that Ogerpon and just clicking the bonk button, picking up 6 KOs in this game and his nice 4-0 victory, the biggest victory of week 1, really cementing himself as a big contender this season. Seabad played this one very well. And then lastly, we have to shout out my personal favorite set of the week. Kyle's was awesome with the Rillaboom, but man, was this Tinglu impressive. Viz came prepped and ready to go with a weakness policy Tinglu with Facade tacked on top of it. This was great prep, and I don't even think it was intended to work in the way it did, but it covered both. What I think the initial idea was, in a matchup where you're playing something like a Dragapult, very often the Dragapult is going to see that Tinglu wanting to come in, it's going to click Will-O-Wisp, and then it's going to say, I'm getting out of here, get some chip damage with some U-turn. So in that instance, you get burned, you boost your Facade, and then you take the U-turn, get your weakness policy, and you blow through a team. Ridiculously hard. Plus, there was a lot of other things on the team that could more so passively pop its weakness policy. Something like a Clefable or Thundurus or Azelf is going to hit it for super effective damage for a decent chunk, but it's definitely not going to come close to immediately threatening something as bulky as Tinglu, so that weakness policy on top of Ground plus Dark and the Facade was really difficult for Joey's team to switch into. The way it ended up working out was Heatran burning it, and then I believe it was Thundurus, it was Thundurus or Azelf, but I want to say Thundurus, clicking Grass Knot on it, and from there, paybacking and facading and doing a ton of damage to Joey's team to where he really couldn't come back and put himself in a position to win. The Facade was incredible to take out the Quackleval, which was a huge threat otherwise, and honestly may have taken home the game at that point, so I was incredibly impressed. Again, another set that showed great foresight and showed that Viz really understood the sequencing of his team, how he needed to play it, and I was very impressed with this play and this bring. Really good stuff to Viz, pulling off a big victory in week 1 against Joey. Really quick, back to the results screen. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen our pick'em score for the season. Unfortunately, we're starting off 3-4 this week. You'll see our pick'ems for this week. Hopefully, we can pick up the score. My goal is to end the season above 500 when it comes to pick'ems, but there was a lot of really close matchups. As you can see, we didn't have a game greater than 4-0, and there was a ton of 3-0 games, 2-0 games, 1-0 games, so it was a very close week. So I'm not too upset with my performance up to this point. But again, my end of the goal year is to have an above 500% or an above 500 pick'em score, so hopefully we can get some right this week. Our first matchup we're talking about today is going to be Seabad versus Drewby, the Detroit Steelwings versus the New York Marauders, and the first Pokemon I gotta talk about in this matchup is going to be the Iron Bundle. If you look at Ice plus Water against this team, there's really not much Drewby has for it. Funny enough, the only two Pokemon that can take 2 hits from a Specs bundle, which can go modest in this game, keep in mind, is going to be a Max Spadef Pheasantipity. It is required to hold a Black Sludge, though, or it is I think it's around a 50-50 roll in order for Hydro Pump to 2-hit KO with the Specs, but a Spadef Black Sludge set can take 2 bundle hits, provided hazards stay away. There cannot be a rock nor a spike on the field at any time, nor can the Pheasantipity do anything other than roost in order to stay out of that 2-hit KO range. An Assault Vest Conkeldurr can also do something similar in checking bundle, but there are solid conk checks on Seabad's teams. Things like the Donphan and the Cresselia especially are going to check it very well, but I do think like an AV Mach Punch set is really strong here for things like Bundle, Lucario, Hydreigon, and even the Ogerpon after it gets a little bit chipped. So I think those two Pokemon are really the only 2 stopgaps to the bundle, but all Seabad really needs to do in this matchup, in my opinion, is get up a Spike. Does he have Spike? He does with the Hisuian Quillfish. Or get up Rocks, and from there, as long as he keeps them up, he should be able to just click buttons with bundle and really go crazy. The exact opposite of his matchup last week with Danny, which is really cool. Now, Ogerpon Hearthflame, I don't think it has the 6-0 matchup, and again, I really think the Bundle and Ogerpon kind of switched roles in these games, because last game, Bundle didn't have a great matchup, it was there to flip turn, get an Ogerpon killed everything. This game, Bundle has a phenomenal matchup, and Ogerpon is walled by something like a defensive Salamence. Now, Play Rough can do a decent amount of damage, but if it's into him, and it's physically defensive, it's actually going to eat that up pretty decently, and plus it has to predict and click that Play Rough on the switch-in. But what Ogerpon can do is it can run a U-turn variant, which I think is a little bit more likely. U-turn on the Salamence coming in, then Bundle comes in and it clicks Freeze Dry, and something pretty much dies, right? Or it clicks Hydro Pump on a predicted switch, or it clicks Ice Beam because there's no water that actually takes the hit if Slowbro doesn't come or anything like that. So I really do think that Seabad can just win this game by clicking the Bundle button. That is all he really needs to do. Now, from Drewby's side, he does have some great tools. I think the possibility of a Trailblaze endgame with Ogerpon is very likely. One of the big stopgaps is again going to be something like a Cresselia, but Cresselia is going to have to take chip, probably have to eat a knockout from the Conkeldurr, which can be very beneficial. And outside of that, I think the Ogerpon Wellspring does really well in this matchup. This is another really solid Arcanine matchup. Look at the Flare Blitz resist. It doesn't exist at all. Potentially Scarf or Banded, depending on the route he wants to go. Banded could be really solid if he gets in on Seabad's slower things, like the Cresselia, like a potential Grimmsnarl or a Vikavolt, and it'll 2-hit KO a Donphan on the switch in, which might be the initial response to this thing. So Arcanine is going to be very strong. The Mints, again, seems very required when it comes to defensively checking the Ogerpon, or that thing gets out of hand really, really fast. And then Conkeldurr also looks really good, as well as things like Pheasantipity and Low Kicks looks very strong. If I'm Drewby, my way of winning this game is going to be priority through Low Kicks and Conk, breaking with Arcanine, checking things defensively with a physically defensive Ments and a Spadef Pheasantipity, and hopefully winning with a Trailblaze Ogerpon later on in the game. There's also the option of potentially bringing a Trevenant to spin block against his team if he wants to fit hazards on his Arcanine. But despite these things, I think the bundle matchup is so overwhelmingly good for Seabad. I'm going to take Seabad in this game over Drewby. We'll see how it goes, though. Drewby can definitely still pull it out. Alright, our last matchup, we had two coaches coming off of big wins in Week 1. Now we have two coaches coming off of a loss in Week 1 in the Carolina Hacksters and 6 Foot Hacks and the Los Angeles Wakers and Joey Pokegame. This is going to be a really, really big match for both of these guys. Really want to get off on the right foot, and they're both great, great players, so you know they're both going to go hard for this one. Now, again, we want to talk about that highlight Pokemon, and that is going to be Dragapult in this game. I'd like you to tell me the Dragapult switch in. Okay. Now, there is a Ghost immunity in something like a Braviary, so if that comes, Shadow Ball isn't as immediately spammable. But outside of that, I think the moves Shadow Ball and Draco Meteor, depending on which one Joey wants to click, are just unguardable in this matchup. They are not easily dealt with at all. Pult is going to come in, it's going to click Spec Shadow Ball if that Braviary isn't there, and it's going to pick a KO. Pretty much every time. Pokemon like Tinkatongue, if their Spadef can switch in once, that's it. Something like a Skuntank can take Shadow Balls, but it's one Draco Meteor away from not being a Pokemon anymore. So that's a really big aspect of this. Quackleval also has big snowball potential. There is the potential of Quagsire on the other side, which can be unaware, but some kind of taunt Quack could obviously bully down a Quag, and if the Quag doesn't come or is chipped or killed, I'd like you to look at an SD or a bulk upset. It really can get out of hand really fast with the combination of just like water plus ice. It goes absolutely crazy in this matchup with proper chip. And something like Pult does get that chip, he's going to be in a good spot. Outside of that, hazards. Joey getting up spikes and rocks are going to be very paramount. Again, for Pokemon like Screamtail, for Pokemon like Tinkaton that want to switch in on Dragapult or something like that, for something like Quagsire, if those Pokemon are not holding boots, once those spikes go up and they start taking chip after chip after chip, it's going to be really difficult to deal with Pokemon like Pult and Quackleval and a potential Thundurus, Azelf, all these big offensive threats if you're either holding mono boots because you're not a resist berry or leftovers or whatever it may be. Or if you're not, you're going to get 2-hit KO'd after these hazards chip you down and things like that. And that should open up an endgame for something like either Pult cleaning up Quackleval or Terra Electric Torterra. Again, look at the combination of this thing's moves. Ground, Grass, and Electric hits everything outside of a Decidueye. And again, Decidueye is a Pokemon that is not the greatest in this matchup, to be honest. It actually does not check much other than the Torterra. It has the chance to check a Quackleval depending on what ends up happening, but if that Quackleval does get off a big Ice Spinner into the thing, that really opens the Torterra. So I think Torterra is a very viable win con. If I'm Joe, I'm getting up hazards, I'm breaking with Pult, and I'm trying to win with Quack or Tort, one of the two. Now, from Leo's side, I think Infernape once again looks incredible this game. I think a Choice Band set is really solid. It does have to get in on things slower than it, but there are a lot of things slower than it. Everything slower than Azelf and Dragapult is naturally going to be slower unless there's a Scarf, and the combination of Flare Blitz and Close Combat does really well in this game. Plus, the Banded Mach Punch priority for something like a Torterra once it get boosted up can be very clutch and advantageous for Leo to have in this matchup in particular, and Banded U-turns are also going to chip things down if we want to, kind of scout and see responses and things like that. It does have a little bit of trouble locking, but it's not like the Pokemon that come in on its resisted attacks are going to take them well. And the Heatran plus Dragapult can be a little bit annoying, having to play around those immunities, but Dragapult's going to take a clean 50-ish% from a Banded Flare Blitz, and that's great in this matchup where you have, such an abysmal Dragapult matchup, and Heatran might be able to come in on that Flare Blitz, but it's really got to risk taking that close combat and just getting absolutely blown up. So I do think like a Choice Band Infernape, if played aggressively, can do very well in this game. Tornadus is going to be a great soft check to a lot of things on this team. I think a standard taunt set is going to be very good here. Taunt, Hurricane / Bleak Wind, Knockoff, and U-Turn. It checks things like the Clefable. It stops hazards from going up in the early game. It checks things like the Azelf. If there's Scarf, you live a hit, you knock it off, then you U-Turn and pick it off. Same thing with Pult. If you can knock off that thing's specs, it becomes much more manageable to deal with, or its potential resist variant, spell tag, whatever item that it wants to go for. Getting rid of that is very important. And again, taunt for something like a Torterra trying to set up Clefable, Overquill, even a set up Thunders in the endgame, which is a very viable option for Joey. You kind of stop that thing from agilitying up and winning the game in that way. So I think that Torn is going to be very important here. And then if I'm Leo, my endgame is going to be Haxorus. Look at this Pokemon, look at the opposing team. You have the Unaware Clefable, but you have Mold Breaker as an option in order to bypass that. Now, it won't die to a +1 Poison Jab, but if you get any type of chip on that Clefable at all, even if it's just a banded close combat, then you can come with your Dragapult or your Haxorus. You can Dragon Dance up, and you can potentially win the game. If you look at Dragon, Poison, Ground against this team, it is unguardable. There is not anything that takes on that combination of moves. And I really do think that Haxorus can come in and go really crazy in this matchup and pick up the win for Leo. However, I am going to go with Joey in this matchup just because I think his offense is so overwhelming, and the lack of hazard control from Leo really being able to stop a lot of that is going to be tough to deal with. He has the Defog Braviary, but Defog Braviary isn't the most reliable thing, and it honestly isn't great into this matchup, as it does kind of get whittled down and chipped by a lot of those hazard setters and beaten by a lot of them. So I'm going to lean Joey here, but I could see the game going either way for sure. Our third matchup we're going to go over this week is going to be Mephisto versus its Danny Mac in a matchup where I think Gengar does phenomenally. I think in particular Scarf is going to be very strong. If you look at its dual stats, its answer one is blown up by the other. For example, if you bring a random Sawsbuck off the bench, right, because it's your only ghost immunity, it's going to get blown up by a Sludge Bomb. Same thing with Shiftry. If Shiftry comes off the bench and then wants to pull up for Danny, it's going to get blown up by a Sludge Bomb if it switches in on it. And vice versa for Drifblim, which is going to be a good poison resist, gets blown up by Shadow Ball. Everything else does not take neutral Shadow Ball as well. So I think this is a very good win con and breaker in this game, and great revenge killer. It also outspeeds a +1 Wake with booster speed, and outspeeds a Lycanroc that's not Scarf. It ties it otherwise. Outspeeds Scarf Jirachi, outspeeds +1 Sandy Shocks. It's phenomenal speed control in this game. So I think that is going to be the biggest key to Mephisto doing well. Florges plus Sandaconda is also a very good defensive core in this game. It really does check each and one another's checks and counters and things like that. Florges is going to be great for things like the Walking Wake. It's going to be great for things like even potentially Shiftry. Now, once Shiftry gets boosted, it might break open for Wake, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then Sandaconda is going to check a lot of that physical offense. A physical Jirachi, Okidoki, and Lycanroc especially, though. It is really the only stopgap to that thing. But Florges does pass Great Wishes into it, because Florges is going to come in, which means Jirachi is going to come in, which means a Wish happens into Sandaconda. You chip it with some Rocky Helmet if it is going to be, you know, a physical set. You get up your rocks, you start whittling things down. You're in a pretty good spot. Samurott also looks very strong in this game. I think a potential lead Sash set just could do really well here. There's not much to turn Spikes from staying up forever in this game. So getting in that Samurott and clicking Ceaseless Edge as many times as you possibly can in that early game is going to be great. There's also the potential of having strong suckers for, you know, scary things in the back, and just being generally very strong in this matchup. Samurott looks really good here. So I definitely think it'll come. And then Cinderace also feels very strong in the sun. Obviously something like Wake can resist fire, but it's not going to want to come in on a Banded or even just a regular Protean U-turn. And then things like Zard and Ninetales also don't have the best bulk in the world, so I think Cinderace feels very strong in the sun as well. So I definitely bring those 5 Pokemon at the very least. In the 6th, there's a ton of things that can come, whether it be Zapdos is a great Jirachi and Okidoki check, or so many different other things. You do have to worry about Hurricane, accuracy in the sun, but Mephisto's no stranger to unfortunately missing Hurricane in his last game. Now, as for Danny's side, I think Okidoki looks pretty solid once the Sandaconda gets chipped, and you can facilitate that on chip. You can hit it with a knockoff, poison it, and if it doesn't get the Shed Skin early, you're in a good spot. There's also strong Ice Punches you can throw off into it. Sandy Shocks also looks very strong. It pivots well into Pokemon like Zapdos and Scizor, which is really nice, and it gets up hazards for this team, which is really cool. You do have to be careful about Cinderace, but I don't think that Cinderace is going to be court change if it comes, because I think Samurott's going to try and get up spikes for Mephisto's side. So that's something else to keep in mind. Charizard looks really good on the bench. Please bring Broski this week, Danny. I'm telling you, he looks good here. I promise it's a solid Cinderace pivot. It hits this team very hard. It checks the Scizor. It checks the Florges. It really does not have good switch-ins on Mephisto's team. I really think he should contemplate bringing it in this game. And even if it just boots Solar Power to come in and click some early game and do some damage, like the Solar Power boosted Overheat doesn't have any counterplay in this game. So I really hope he ends up bringing that guy. I think it looks really good here. And then as for win con potential, I think that Specs Wake is probably Danny's angle here. It doesn't have great switch-ins outside of something like a Florges. Florges can take 2 speed boosting, but again, not 2 special attack boosting. I would probably lean speed boosting in this game because you want to be able to revenge non-Scarf Gengar, Cinderace, things like that. You want to outspeed Scarf Passimian if that ends up coming again. Same thing with Samurott. Like, I think the speed boost is very important in this game. There's, you know, potential Scarfs that are scary, but you can also take the special attack boosting thing and just kind of deal with Scarfers as they come, or just deal with the Pokemon that are faster than you in other ways. I don't know if I would do that though, but yeah, regardless, I am going to take Mephisto in this game. I do think that the Gengar is just overwhelming here, and then Pokemon like the Samurott getting up spikes and the solid defensive core of Florges, Zapdos, and Sandaconda are going to probably carry him to a victory this game, if I had to put money on it. Alright, next up we have the Miami Dawn fans and Shovel King. Again, 2 coaches who took home a big W in their Week 1 game, looking to keep the ball rolling. Now, of course, our highlight mon is going to be Enamorus. I want you to look at the combination of Moonblast plus Earth Power in this matchup. Okay, have you looked? What does Kyle do about it? He really does not have an answer to Enamorus whatsoever. The only thing that I could think of when I was looking at this is like some kind of AV Mew as a pivot. Could be nice to get in, Volt Switch out, and then get in something free to, you know, potentially threaten the Enamorus out. But really, how many times can you use that to check this Enamorus, especially if hazards are up? This thing looks absolutely incredible. Whether it be a Scarf variant, or not Scarf, a Specs variant. I don't think Scarf is very good. A Specs variant, or even just like a Heavy Duty Boots or a Life Orb variant, nothing switches into Moonblast plus Earth Power at all, especially with the combination of hazards, which I think Garchomp is an incredible hazard set of this game. Kyle's removal does not appreciate Garchomp, and he just gets it in and he clicks Spikes for free, Spikes and Rocks for free the entirety of the game. So I think that's a really cool option for Shuckle, and that's how I would kind of approach this matchup, is get up Spikes, break with Enam, and kind of win in that regards. I think Scarf Meowscarada is incredible speed control this game. It gives him something faster than Moon. It gives him something faster than the Beartick, I believe, in Hail as well, unless my head calcs are just absolutely torn up. But it just looks very strong in general. Some kind of knockoff U-turn, play rough / brick break, and then probably Flower Chick in the last slot moveset can be very powerful in this game. I really do like that a lot. You might not even need Flower Chick, to be completely honest. You might be able to go play rough like brick break or something like that. But again, looks very strong in this matchup. I like it a lot. Monkey Dory also has no answers. Unironically, Monkey Dory looks incredible here. Dark type in the Roaring Moon is going to take a ton from Sludge Wave, and the Steel type is neutral to Psychic. So this thing is very strong offensively, in my opinion. Some kind of Nasty Plot set could be very strong, as well as even some Scarf or some Spec set could be really strong. But I really do think that Nasty Plot might be a little bit better because it finds some pretty awesome setup opportunities. So that could be a really cool aspect of this. And then Umbreon. I mean, I think Terra Fairy in this game is great. Terra Poison is also very strong. It checks things like Rillaboom really well. But I think Terra Fairy is really strong. And with Inner Focus, you're going to be a phenomenal check to that Roaring Moon. You can't even get flinched by the Iron Head. So as long as you stay out of range, which shouldn't be too hard with a physically defensive Umbreon, you can come in, you can just click Terra Blast. You're also not going to be intimidated by the Tauros, so it can't pivot in on you clicking a physical Terra Blast, which is also a very clutch aspect of it. Very bulky and obnoxious Pokemon. Looks really strong here. And then lastly, Bronzong. I think it's probably your 6th mon in this matchup. It's your best ice check into Hail. Things like Alola and Beartick really don't appreciate it a ton. And that plus Umbreon keeping it healthy with Wishes forms a very solid defensive core with your top 4 of really strong offense. So if I'm Shuckle, I'm bringing my top 6, and I think it's very overwhelming for Kyle. Now, on Kyle's side, Ninetales plus Beartick are very overwhelming in this matchup. Not that they immediately win on their own, right? Because Bronzong is a great check to both of those things. But they do overload and overwhelm each other. You can go the route of having Nasty Plot Ninetales with like a Dark Pulse to really chip down that Bronzong and open up the game for Beartick, or vice versa, have Beartick come in, maybe SD Terra Electric, and hit a strong Terra Blast into that Bronzong, and hopefully whittle it down so that your Ninetales can come in and pick KOs. I would probably lean the Performer and use Ninetales to kind of chip down the Bronzong and deal with it that way, opposed to going with Beartic to do so, because I think Beartic can legitimately win the game. Otherwise, especially if it's not a Scarf Meowscarada, it really outspeeds and everything and does a ton of damage to everything with a Terra Electric set. So I like that aspect of it. I also think that a Choice Banded Roaring Moon could be very strong. I don't know if it has the opportunity to set up very well in this game, especially with Pokemon like Girder also being a potential option. Talonflame with priority, as well as just bulky Pokemon like Umbreon. But if we get in early, we're clicking U-turns and knockoffs and Iron Heads and Dragon moves, we're going to slowly whittle this team down, and we're going to get in our strong breakers as well. Now, Rillaboom, again, looks incredible in this game, not necessarily because it is phenomenal offensively, but because those knockoffs it spreads in this game. Knocking off things like Bronzong, Enamorus, Talonflame, being able to knock those things off really opens up the rest of your team, in particular, knocking off the Bronzong. If Shuckle ends up using his Bronzong to pivot into Rillaboom and gets knocked off, man, does your hail look good. Or your snow, I guess. Does it look good? It looks incredible. Otherwise, again, I think that AV Mew is a very good pivot in this game, being able to pivot into the Enamorus. I think Kyle's key is to recognize this matchup is very offensive in nature, and he's not going to be able to check Shuckle's team defensively. So having a team full of pivots to get in and out and overwhelm Shuckle before Shuckle can gain momentum and kind of run away with the game is important. However, I do think that this is Shuckle's game to win, especially just because of that Enam matchup, that Munkidori matchup, and how solid of speed control the Meowscarada is against an offensive team like this, and an offensive matchup as well. So I am going to lean Shuckle King in this one. Next up, we have another couple of coaches looking for a bounce-back week and grabbing their first win in Uzi and Nexus. Now, on Nexus' side, you see he has the highlight mon this week. It's going to be Iron Valiant. This Pokemon does absolutely insane in this matchup. Its dual stabs of Fairy and Fighting go basically unresisted in this matchup, outside of something like Ceruledge, which you can always tech on a knockoff for, and it's not like it's the bulkiest Pokemon in the world, so knocking off that thing's item, like its boots, if it is a more defensive bulky set, is going to be very, very clutch, and then next time it's probably 2-hit KO by a Moonblast or a Spirit Break, so I think that aspect of it is going to be really, really clutch and really, really nice for Nexus. Next up, also, we have Hippowdon, which I think is a great defensive check to a couple of the scary physically offensive Pokemon that could really, give Nexus some trouble. The Great Tusk in particular seems really, really scary with some kind of bulk up set. I'll talk about in a second, but I think maybe even a bulk up weakness policy set could be really scary for Uzi, whereas like a Yawn Hippo or a Whirlwind Hippo should be able to deal with that. It also checks a Ceruledge, which is the biggest stopgap to your best Pokemon in the matchup in Iron Valiant, so I think that's a really clutch aspect. I also love two of Uzi's Terra Captains here in both the Electrode Hisui and the Houndstone. Now, he will have to decide which one he brings, because both of them aren't good without Terra here, if that makes any sense. I think that Houndstone with Terra Fighting is very, very strong. There obviously is things like Weavile and Ursaluna that can switch in on moves like Poltergeist Into the Sand, but they're not going to appreciate a Terrifying Terra Blast or even a Bounty Press from a more defensive set, which could also be a very viable option in this matchup. But on top of that, Electric, Ice, and Grass is very, very solid. Sorry about the stuttering there. Is very, very solid this matchup. So Electrode Hisui could also for sure come. It gets free Volt Switches in this game, and no matter what, it is going to cover that Kilowattrel Terra type, which is really nice. It has Ice if it decides to go Flying for some reason, and then it has Leaf Storm if it decides to go Water, which I think is very, very nice, or very, very likely. So I think the Electrode Hisui looks incredible in this game. Now, something like Dragalge will check it, even though it is Terra Ice, but if you get up Hazards and you Volt Switch around enough, and even if there's some sand maybe from your Hippo, it's going to get whittled down and put in a range pretty soon. That's another Pokemon that will take a Valiant hit, so the more things we're chipping down for Valiant, the better for Nexus, in my opinion. So I think that's very solid, and then the combination of Ogerpon and Iron Moth are very solid. Now, Nexus can go two routes, in my opinion. One is going to be using the Iron Moth to U-turn in and out and kind of chip things down. It's going to force in things like Dragalge and really, really whittle them down. Forcing things like Ceruledge even, because it does resist the dual stabs again, and whittle them down to where Pokemon in the back can win, like the Iron Valiant or the Ogerpon, which I also think is a great win con with a Swords Dance set. Grass plus Rock is really, really strong into Uzi's team. Really, really strong. So some kind of Swords Dance Trailblaze set could put in some work. Gotta be careful about staying out of Weavile range, but if you can position both moves, it's going to be really, really nice. Or he could take the opposite approach. He could go Spiking Ogerpon with some kind of agility win con Iron Moth, if things like the Ogerpon getting up spikes chips things down and Iron Valiant chips things down. Something like Iron Moth can win. So I think Uzi has, or Nexus has a lot of options when it comes to setting up a win condition against Uzi's team. It really just depends on how he wants to structure his team. And yeah, Next up on Uzi's side, though, we have some really scary stuff. SD Ursaluna looks really strong in this game. It really bullies Nexus's fat. It doesn't really die to any one hit. I can even see it not going Flame Orb and just being SD. It's really strong here, in all honesty, and can really break through Nexus's team really easily. Shaman also puts up a lot of pressure with just that Seed Flare, Dazzling Gleam, Earth Power combination. You can also go a sub-Leech variant if you really want. I think that could also be really annoying for a lot of Uzi's fat, and things like a non-Whirlwind Hippo, things like a Mandibuzz, things like an Alamomola you always get a sub on, and then the Electrode isn't going to be able to really revenge you very well, because if it comes in Terra Blast Ice, you're going to blow it up with some kind of attack on the, subsequent turn after, it breaks your sub, because it's not the bulkiest Pokemon in the world. So I think that's really cool. Now, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I also think some kind of bulk up Great Tusk could be very strong here. Some bulk up Rapid Spin weakness policy shenanigans could be very strong. It really punishes a lot of weaker super effective hits that might come into it. Something like an Alamomola, something like a Mandibuzz, something like a Zen Headbutt from King Gambit could all be really solid, in the sense that if that Tusk does get set up, that Hippo is either chipped or not Whirlwind or not Yawn, whatever it might be. And really can just win the game immediately, and really punishes. And again, it's also, if Mandibuzz is like just a mono foul play variant, then Tusk sets up all over it. So I think that could obviously be very solid. Scarf Gardevoir does not have great pivots into this game. Moonblast is incredibly free into this draft, especially because the Fairy Resist is going to be something like an Iron Moth, which isn't going to want to take a Psychic or a Psyshock. It's going to get blown up by them. Swords Dance Weavile also looks very strong in the event that Alamomola does not come, which I think Aloe is actually pretty darn passive here, so I could totally see Nexus leaving it on the bench. If that doesn't come, then man, does Weavile just kill everything on this team. It doesn't even need to be SD, to be completely honest. It can go Ice Stab, Knock Off, Low Kick, and Ice Shard, and really hit everything incredibly hard. And then obviously, Terra Water Kilowattra does incredible this game. That's all it needs, is its original stabs plus water, and hits everything very hard. Nexus doesn't have conventional defensive counterplay to that Pokemon at all. I think his best bet is going to be something like an AV King Gambit, but Gambit, honestly, it probably has one of the more mediocre matches it can have all season, just because of the fact that Great Tusk does exist, but it also soft checks things like Gardevoir as well, so maybe Gambit does end up coming to kind of soft check the Kilowattra. But regardless, despite Uzi having a lot of threats and me thinking this matchup is pretty darn close, I'm actually going to lean Nexus this week, just because I think his offense can get out of hand a lot faster. Things like the Iron Moth, Ogerpon, the Valiant especially, and then something like Electro Hisui or Houndstone, plus a solid defensive core as well. I think Nexus has got this one at a very slight margin. I feel like we just keep going from 2 coaches that lost to 2 coaches that won after every single matchup, and we have another one where 2 coaches who came off a win week 1 want to keep their momentum going in the Copenhagen Glades and Gentleman Thomas and the South Texas Sableye of Invivid Color. This is a pretty interesting matchup. On Thomas's side, Assault Vest Azumarill, or some kind of Azumarill in general, looks very strong into Vivid's team. It's going to be a great Chi-Yu check. It's going to soft check things like Gran if they're not clicking Gunshot or hitting Gunshot. And it even can take hits from things like Cleavor, from things like Goldango, and it has really strong Aqua Jet priority and really not a lot of switching. So it checks Chi-Yu and it puts Vivid in a very uncomfortable position where he does not want to switch into it at all. So I think Azumarill is going to be very important. Next up is going to be Baxcalibur as well. I think this is going to be our highlight mon in this matchup. Look at the combination. I might say this every week, but especially against Vivid's team, look at the combination of Ice, Dragon, and Ground. It looks really scary. I think Vivid's real only counterplay is going to be either an Air Balloon or more than likely a Shukaberry Goldango as a way of taking a hit from this thing and revenging it with a Make It Rain. But if Vivid Scout, or if Thomas scouts for that or chips it down at all prior with something like an Azumarill, maybe getting a knockoff onto it or something like that, he's going to be in a really good spot in a really good spot to just straight up win this game with Baxcalibur. There's also not a lot of ways of immediately revenging it or pressuring it otherwise, in my opinion. You may be a Scarf Chi-Yu, but you're not going to Oko it back from full, that's for damn sure. So this thing definitely looks really scary. Slowking is also tough for Vivid to switch into. It's not the best defensively in this matchup. It soft checks some things, but it doesn't have a great purpose. Something I could totally see it doing, though, is being an offensive Trick Room set. Maybe like OTR, Trick Room weakness policy, really putting in a ton of work, or even Life Orb going absolutely crazy with just dual stabs plus Flamethrower to really well here. And I could totally see it putting in a ton of work. Scarf's Root also seems very valuable despite being stuffed by a few mons. It outspeeds things like non-Scarf Gren, Scarf Goldango, Scarf Chi-Yu, and things like Scarf Cleavor. It is, again, kind of walled by a Pokemon like Enamorous. It's checked really well by a Pokemon like the Decidueye Hisui or the Abomasnow, but I think its speed tier is going to be very valuable for Thomas. Spadef, Gliscor is also going to be very important. I think it's great at pivoting into something like Goldango, which Thomas's team doesn't have great answers for right now. That in conjunction with Protect, EQ. Again, you can go Toxic Spikes again, or Toxic Spikes in general, because it doesn't look like Vivid really has a great way of absorbing those things. You're going to be in a pretty good spot. It definitely looks really strong here. And is, you know, a really important mon in this matchup, in my opinion. And lastly, if you look at Tauros Paldea, I mean, we talked about it last week with Infernape and the firefighting stab combination against Vivid's team. I think the Tauros Paldea does it almost even better with how good it is in this matchup. I think a potential Trailblaze variant as a win con could be very, very strong. Now, it does have to stay in range of a potential Water Shuriken from Greninja, but once it gets that Trailblaze up, it outspeeds pretty much everything and it goes to town. I mean, there's not much on Vivid's team that could even dream about dealing with that dual stab combination right now. It does insanely, insanely well. You might need to bulk up a little bit for the Enamorous. You might need to, whittle it down a little bit prior at the very least, but regardless, I think Bull is a very solid win con. Next up on Vivid's side, I think Gren plus Cleavor seems like a very solid momentum core. The Cleavor in general with a choice band set just has no switch-ins. It's very strong. It comes in, it clicks Stone Axe immediately, and rocks go up, and something might die or take 70%. Like, it really doesn't have any switch-ins. Something like Fortress isn't going to want to switch in, which is awesome. And then throughout the rest of the game, you can U-turn, get into something like a Greninja, U-turn again, and again, if we have rocks up, that consistent U-turn damage is going to be very, very clutch for something like Chi-Yu or Goldango to come in and click buttons a little bit later on. Like I said, Chi-Yu is going to be really, really nice here. I think a Scarf Lava Plume set could be very nice just because, one, you're still Scarf and you're still threatening offensively, but two, if you catch that Azu on the switch-in, if it is the switch-in to the Chi-Yu, and you hit it with a Lava Plume burn, that is incredibly, incredibly important for your team. It's going to be really nice to whittle that thing down, as well as really, really neuter its attacking prowess versus you and really open up your own Chi-Yu endgame by, kind of whittling down your own check, which I think could be really nice. You can go some kind of like Dark Pulse, Lava Plume, Overheat, and then probably Psychic in your last slot for something like the Tauros Bull, which resists your stabs otherwise, and you'll be in a pretty darn good spot. Goldango is also very strong here, like we mentioned. Maybe Air Balloon, but Shuka seems a little bit better. It also just does really well here with the Nasty Plot variant. If you kill the Baxcalibur too, you can always burn your Shuka on the Gliscor, and always Nasty Plot up and really try and blow it up with a Make It Rain, which can obviously be really nice. And then something like an Assault Vest cycle or some kind of cycle in general to spin away hazards is going to be really, really important. It doesn't necessarily need to be Assault Vest, but it probably has, it's either Assault Vest or Boots here, in my opinion, if you're Vivid. But it's going to be really important keeping hazards away, because hazards going up on your side of the field is really bad for something like your own Scarf Chi-Yu if you end up going that route. If you end up going a non-Boots Cleavor, which you probably go something like a Band, it really does help out this team a ton. But overall, I do think that Thomas's matchup offensively is just a little bit overwhelming for Vivid, and I'm going to take Thomas in this one. And then lastly, we have a really exciting matchup in Viz versus MV. Now, from MV's side, I think there are a couple of really cool things that he has as options. One is going to be Manaphy. It feels very, very strong in this matchup. Tail Glow seems very, very overwhelming for Viz's team once it starts getting boosted up and throwing off attacks. So I think that Manaphy is going to be very, very strong here. SPN also seems very important as a special breaker that immediately threatens Annihilate, as well as a potential sticky web blocker, because I think webs going up on MV's side are very, very bad. So if he is like tearing into a fairy type or something like that, he can avoid that bug buzz damage, as well as avoid the webs from going up if Viz starts to get a little bit over aggressive in that result. G-Weezing can also come as a defogger. Again, I really do think that hazards off of MV's field are going to be the most important thing when it comes to him winning the game, as well as all the spikes and T-spikes that are going up. It also checks things like the Annihilate softly, not great, but soft checks them, and it does check the D-Knight very well if it is a physical variant. So I think that G-Weezing is definitely a Pokemon that's going to come off the bench. And something like a Boots to Dunsparce can be a great pivot into either D-Knight or Armarouge, depending on whether or not it wants to be physically defensive or specially defensive. The only issue with the Dunsparce is going to be the Annihilate, and that's the highlight on this matchup, right? Because Bulk Up does really well. It usually does really well and can find an opportunity to really put a hole on a team. So I definitely think a Bulk Up Spadef set could definitely come in this matchup. But I also think that something that could be a really cool option from Viz's side is going to be Assault Vest Annihilate. The thing is incredibly bulky with an AV. It allows us to grab momentum throughout the game. It allows us to pivot in more, take more special hits, and boost up those rage fists. If Viz can get up webs as well as an AV Annihilate that has great coverage and can whittle down this opposing team and checks things like the Ursaluna, checks things like the Manaphy, checks things like the Thunders, and even just absolutely eats up a hit from SPL no matter what, it's going to be very, very strong and very difficult for Envy to deal with in this matchup. I think Assault Vest could be really, really cool. Just a matter if he ends up running that. Now, like I said, web is going to be really, really important in this game. I think web's definitely at least attempt to come. I think Envy's game plan is going to be predicated on not allowing those webs to go up because they're going to be very difficult to remove throughout the game if so. So that's obviously nice. Tinglu also looks very good as a spiker. It's very good defensively in this game as per usual. It is a Tinglu. Checks things like Espeon even when they Terra Fairy because it's so damn bulky. And it could potentially get up some spikes on things not named Espeon, which is great. Ruinations and things down. Be generally annoying. Also, Terra Ice Jolteon. I think that combination of AV Ape U-turning around and Terra Ice Jolteon Volt switching around, as well as spikes from Tinglu, webs from the Rabombi can be really, really difficult for Envy to deal with. I really do think that the Terra Jolteon comes this week, makes an appearance, and hopefully does a lot of work. Something like Ursaluna also isn't super scary if you do have a really bulky ape in the back, or as well as something like a Corviknight, as well as something like a Tinglu. This really isn't the best Blood Moon matchup in the world, so I think it definitely could be very, very solid here. Another solid option and win condition with App Chip could actually be a Rock Polish Glimmora. Again, if we use Tinglu as that spiker and we really whittle things down with our momentum core of Ape and Jolteon and get around constantly, a Rock Polish Glimmora could really put in a lot of work here. Really, things like the Ursaluna and the Goodra would need to be chipped the most. And there's obviously other things that need to be chipped a ton, but I think it's a very viable option. It's very strong in this matchup in general. And then Corviknight can definitely come as a Sneasler check, as well as being able to pivot into things like Blood Moon. It really helps out the ape, so the ape isn't as pressured at taking on Sneasler, because you don't want to get put to sleep, poisoned, parried, whatever it is, by Dire Claw shenanigans. So I definitely think that it might come. Overall, I think Viz's matchup is a little bit better than Envy's. I really do think that if he does go that hazards plus momentum constantly core, and he can eliminate that Espeon early so that he gets free hazards, he's going to be in a really good spot. And I really just like his defensive core into Envy's offense. I think he has a pretty good matchup, really outside of that Manaphy, which can get pretty overwhelming. And again, something else I do have to mention though is if Viz does let webs get bounced onto his side of the field, he might just lose to Manaphy on the spot. So that's something to keep in mind, obviously, going forward. But I am going to take Viz in this matchup in a slight edge over Envy. Alrighty, gang, that is going to be week 2 of SPL draft notes. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Again, drop your pick'ems down there. I want to see what you guys have, see if you guys agree or disagree with me. Was there anything really cool that you saw from week 1 that I didn't go over in my recap? Let me know as well. And yeah, of course, be sure to check out all the coaches. The game should be going up 2 days from today when I'm uploading this. And yeah, again, drop a sub if you enjoyed, as well as drop a like if you enjoyed. And I will see you guys in the next one. Later.